All right, fucking cool. All right.
Off and running, baby.
Off and running.
That sounds good.
That sounds good. Yeah, this is the first. That sounds good. What's your go-to method for creation? I don't know if you saw the other day, I kind of posted something like that. Like, I don't know if you saw it, but it's like, in my mind, there's like a bunch of ways that I go about like the initial process of production.
Mhm.
And it's obviously not black and white, but like for me, it's usually like, okay, like I either have something organically in my head and I'll run with that, which happens for, I don't know, some people are like, it comes from God. Whereas some people are just like, whatever, it just fucking came to my head, whatever the fuck you believe in. But like you hear something before you even play anything, which I think is like great when that happens. So it's either something pops in your head, you mess around with like keys or something, or you get something external, like a sample or whatever. And like, I feel like no matter what method you go to, like it's all part of the creation process, but like certain ways that I tend to create makes me like feel a certain way. Like, and it's all music. It's like, no matter what you do, it's like, it's how you get there. You know, it's like nobody knows like, oh, like this was like a sample or whatever. But like as like producers, because we have like pride and stuff, like I feel like that factors in like how we feel about the creation process. Like, I don't know, like what do you tend to, because it's always going to be different. There's no like way that you're gonna make music 100% of the time. Like, what do you tend to like lean to?
So I definitely tend to lean towards like samples first and using that for inspiration and also as like a starting point for my beats and production. I definitely feel like, not like it's lazy to use samples, but like the pride in me and like the little bit of musician in me, like kind of just feels differently. Like I know if I was able to convert an idea in my head to a finished product, like I know that would make me feel more fulfilled. But I still get a lot of joy from samples and flipping them and just manipulating them and trying to make them my own. But at the same time, I know like if I was able to make something all from scratch, like it would give me like more pride just knowing like you had a blank canvas and you turn that into something like all on your own, like without any external help. But yeah, I also feel like I'm at the point where I do get a lot of ideas in my head from time to time, like very sporadic, like not regular, but when I do, like I feel like I don't have the toolkit necessary to like flesh them out and like fully convert them. So
wait, with organic ideas, you're saying?
yeah, like ideas that I have in my head. So I feel like that's part of the reason I tend to like dive into samples a lot more. And yeah, I think also like the genre I produce in, like soul music, like it's hard for me to make any type of sample from scratch, let alone like an authentic 1970s soul type sample, like with no like female vocals or.
Also, too, if you had like a whole production team too, like let's say like you hired out like some female singers and you hired out like a beautiful pianist. Not that like you're, bro, like you have chops, you have piano chops, but like I feel like it's the type of thing where when you're constructing like full, like if you put yourself in the mindset, because it's like, okay, if you hear a beautiful sample, everyone's just like, oh my God, like how can I flip this? But it's like turning your mind into like, okay, like how to produce beautiful samples, like which is like you give credit to like sample libraries that just do that. They're not even thinking about making full beats. They're just thinking about how do we make beautiful starter samples. And it's like that alone, you're composing like a section of a song without the intent of even like finishing it. It's just like beautiful 10-second, 15-second, 20-second instrumentals. And it's like even that thought process, I was like, okay, like you get your female singers, you get all your musicians, and you just riff out like so many ideas, and just to have the freedom to be like, okay, like we're making a sample pack. Like I feel like if I was making a sample pack, like anything goes. Like play any riff on piano, like play like just like do like do anything, because like it could make it. But then if you're making like, those are like the individual like chops, like female chops, like piano chops. But if you're making like a full section of a sample and you're in that thought process of like, okay, like we're making little bits and pieces of songs, like you're gonna go at it super differently. And I feel like it needs to be like taken from that approach because it's it's so intricate and like it's like a big deal, you know? I don't know.
And I feel
But
like it's almost like hard when you're creating a sample, being there every step of the way, to then at the end hear it as like someone would, as a producer would, who's hearing it for the first time.
mhm.
And like that's one thing I definitely struggle with when I try to make something from scratch. Like I almost focus too much on, oh, this chord progression that I've been hearing throughout the piece the whole time.
Mm.
Like I almost like lose sight of the end product
Yeah.
and like hyper focus on small details that someone who's listening to the first time, like they might not even think about it.
Mhm.
But like being there for every step of the way, like
Yeah.
it almost makes it hard to listen to it like someone would for their first time.
Like
And
reverse engineering a sample.
yeah,
It's weird. It's weird because like when you think like what makes a sample, it's like, oh, it feels like it's been there for a while.
mhm,
Like people, you know, crate dig and they take old chops, but it's like people just made that music organically,
yeah,
and now we're hearing it in a different light. So to like to like go back to the beginning to be like, okay, like how do I produce keys? How do I produce strings? How do I like tell someone how to sing and have it sound like something that was already created, but then to have me still inadvertently use it like a sample is like
yeah,
weird because you're like going back to the beginning to you're like producing something from the start to make it sound whole to then use it like it's the start of something.
and yeah,
And it's cool. And if you could do it successfully, like I feel like that's a really, really great feeling. You're making your own samples, and it's
mhm,
like that's awesome. But like what you said before, it's like when you first hear a sample, it hits you differently. If you're the one that's like making the sample, like how do I give myself that same feeling from the very, very beginning? All comes down to like obviously really intelligent and like talent, like really intelligent and talented production from the start to be able to like craft that.
and
And
like vision,
yeah,
which I definitely feel like I lack. And honestly, from
I don't
the
think that.
people that well, I appreciate that, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of it comes with like comes with time and repetition and effort. But like a lot of people that I do know that make samples and samples packs, like they don't really use their own samples to make beats. Like it's almost like two separate worlds for them.
Yeah, just make it and give it off.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
and just sell it in the pack. Because I feel like for me, like the more you listen to a piece of music, whether it's a sample you made, a beat you made, I feel like it's harder to envision you changing it. And like
Yeah,
like you
you're
keep
stuck with it.
listening to this sample, like it's hard for me to like when you hear a sample for the first time, it's easier to just, oh, like I could focus in on this part, like pitch that up, chop this part, that part. But like when I'm hearing the complete sample over and over again and listening to it progress, like it's almost just hard for me to even think of how I could make it different
Hmm.
into something else.
Yeah,
So like I don't know, I definitely think that's a hard aspect of trying to like do both worlds with a sample you create and then making it into a beat as well.
hmm,
But I definitely think I struggle with like it's almost like trying to see the end goal, and a lot of times I'll be making a progression and trying to add the next part and not being able to see how it's going to be towards the end,
yeah,
and kind of just like, oh, like I don't know, this progression, I listened to it all this time, like it's kind of just getting boring,
yeah.
like. And then like meanwhile someone who listens to the whole thing at the end, like they're not even hyper fixating on that
And not
one
you.
piece or stem.
Yeah,
And that's another thing too, like I tend to forget, and I think a lot of producers could relate to this, like you're listening to a song or a beat or a sample as a producer and
hmm,
not as someone who just enjoys music.
Yeah.
Because it's like 98% of the people that are going to consume the song or the final product, they're not an engineer. They're not a producer. They're not caring what hi-hat you use and like all these things that we could like hyper focus on that almost like takes away from the final product in a way.
Yeah. That's, I think, the coolest, the best and worst part about music is that it's all subjective. And I feel like we want it to be subjective because you don't want somebody to say your idea is trash off of an opinion, because it really is all opinion based. But it's like, okay, well, if everything's opinion based, then am I delusional all the time? Like, what if like this hi-hat isn't good?
Yeah.
What if the sound selection is just bad? Because it's like there is room for sure, like what makes, like, for somebody who knows nothing about music or nothing. Okay, everybody knows something about music because we all understand music. It's the language, but it's like if you can ask someone who has no like technical engineering production knowledge, like, oh, like what do you like about this song? Like, what do you like about the drums? Why do you like the drums? Do you think that snare's too loud? Do you think there's anything different that needs to be done with the hi-hat? Like, do you think the vocals are, it's like to try to get someone to explain like engineering and like production nuance, but they don't have the vocabulary for it. It's like they still have an opinion, so it's like the stuff that they don't even know that is important is still important for like digesting a song as a consumer. But
for sure,
so it's like to recognize that and be like, okay, like, sure, like, it's all subjective, there's no right or wrong, but depending on the style, depending on like the initial, like, you know, when you have like your first idea of like maybe, and what we were saying before, even off like a sample, like if a sample puts you into like a space, like you kind of know where you're gonna go, like, and you know what kind of world you're in.
Yeah.
So there's drums and there's drum selections and there's like bass sounds that maybe complement it a little bit more, that make you like believe it a little bit more. So it's like that's the part of like, yeah, it's subjective. Like, you don't there's no right sounds, but like there's sounds that just tend to fit a little bit.
Yeah, tend to work.
And then if you ask someone that doesn't produce or doesn't do anything, like this is good, right? They'll be like, yeah, no, it sounds like a song. Like, it sounds like a song that's out. But if you use sounds that don't really go, or like that, and then completely on the mixing side, if you choose a perfect kick, but you fucking rock a shelf on the low end, like 200 hertz, up 20 dB at 200 hertz, like, you're probably going to make a kick sound that sounds otherwise really beautiful. I'm going to restart that. You're going to take a kick that would sound really, really beautiful, and then with mixing, blow it to shit. Yeah. So it's like, that's something that when you play that in your car, anybody who even doesn't know music and they don't understand like engineering are going to be like, oh my God, this kick is like, blowing out my car. So it's like, there's a lane where it's like everything is subjective, but the choices, that the artistic and creative choices of like sound selection and even mixing could obviously translate to somebody who doesn't understand, because their car speakers are getting blown out, or you're using like a really wonky sounding kick on like a lo-fi track that sure, it could work because there's no right or wrong, but like maybe it doesn't go. And maybe that's the deal breaker of like whether a track is like believable or not, or just enjoyable. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know, the whole subjective thing is like, it's so true, and like you should be able to take chances and experiment with weird sounds,
push the boundaries a little bit.
Sounds that don't really go, sounds that you're like, oh, this is fucking weird, but I like it, and there's nobody saying that I shouldn't mix these sounds together. But I don't know, it's just like, think about like, you ever like some of the weirdest beats that I'm like, this beat sucks, or there's something about this that I hate, but it made it to a record, and that's cool. Like, that producer did what they felt was right, and now it's a song that people get to enjoy or hate, you know. And it's like, that's cool, you know. So it's just weird. It's a weird thing to think about. Like, like we know the technical aspect, and then how are people going to consume it? But it's art. It's not like a 2 + 2 = 4 equation, and that's your right answer. It's like anything could be right. And then especially in the like the engineering and the technical like mixing landscape, it's like there's best practice, but there's also like really bad mixes that get put out to like labels and shit. You know, we all think like everybody has a high standard, everything's mixed perfectly. It's like even mixing is subjective. So it's like it's weird. And it'll drive you absolutely nuts if you let it.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's something that I struggle with 24/7. And sometimes I feel really good about my mixes and my production, and sometimes I do not. And it's helpful to compare because it's like if you're going for a certain sonic, it's like sure, you should if a track that I'm mixing is like reminds me a little bit of like a Dua Lipa track, and that's like a standard for like 2020s dance music, it's like okay, then it makes sense to try to emulate a little bit, but it doesn't have to be that track.
Yeah, every track's different.
Yeah, exactly.
But I definitely struggle with that. One of the many reasons, like aside from just loving like gritty, soulful, gritty jazz type beats, one of the many reasons I like doing it is like you could kind of get away with a raw like mix where you don't necessarily have to.
It's lo-fi. It sucks.
It's like oh like yeah that kick or bass is super muddy or whatever, but it's like oh no like that's just the style. So like that's like one of the many reasons why I like that, because like I could get away with like oh not the best mix and just play it off like oh no it's raw like it's how it's supposed to be. But kind of to backtrack a little bit to like sound selection and like what's right and wrong, I feel like one thing that kind of pioneers new genres is that pushing the boundary, like for example something like jazz funk, like they'll take like a Coltrane sample with Memphis vocals with like hard hitting kicks and snares, and it's like all these different combinations and it somehow like works. But to get to that point where it works and you have a new subgenre, I feel like you got to get through a lot of like, oh, this is terrible. Like this combination's bad, and like eventually the ingredients you just keep throwing them in, and eventually you have this new thing, a new genre, which
it's not
is
supposed
super
to
cool.
work, but it works.
Yeah, like,
and there's nobody saying that it can't. That's how like anything good is made. You know, like.
Just like combining things, like going through the trial and error. And that's the other thing, like so many I feel like trap a lot of the times, like there's kind of just like a blueprint that works, and it's like people almost stick to it a little too much, which I feel like can limit creativity, which is something I really like about just the soulful gritty jazz, like Griselda type beats, which is mainly what I make, because I feel like it's just such a broad, like it could be anything from like a drumless piano piece that like literally sounds like something my grandma would listen to, but then it's like just slight, it's just the variety, and it like gives a producer a lot of room for like creativity and just not having to like kind of, I don't know, not having to like focus on one thing and feeling limited in the genre that you produce. But yeah.
Who are you referring to? Griselda?
Yeah, Griselda, like a lot of beats produced by The Alchemist and Madlib, and those are two of my favorite producers. And I feel like they could just be all over the place. They could take like a sample from like India and like make a beat out of it, or take some like classic like 70s soul and like make a beat out of it. Like kind of just gives them a lot of freedom, and also like increases the amount of artists that they could work with. Yeah. Because it's like, even though they're kind of all like in the same like niche, so to speak, and genre, I feel like they just have, it's such a wide variety of what they can produce, which is definitely cool for me, because like I like having that variety. I like, even like I want to produce funk, lo-fi, trap, and boom bap and all these things, but like I know to build an audience, like it's good to kind of focus, like
a little,
yeah, not like too focused, but like have it so that the audience, when they click on your video or your beat, they have an idea of what they're gonna get. Like it's not like one week I'm making funk and then the next week when I drop a beat, it's like some sad piano piece and it's like I don't even know like what this guy's gonna do. Like
Right.
you need to have like that sort of image and like branding musically, so to speak, which definitely I don't know. I want to like I did it more like before I was trying to do it professionally, like just kind of making whatever I want whenever I wanted and like not caring about who's gonna want to get on the beat or like what type of listeners I want to attract. But it's like once I started to try to make a little bit of money from music, like I kind of realized like in terms of branding, like you kind of need that image musically and that consistency and find like your realm that you want to exist in and just kind of stick to that. And you don't always have to stick to that,
Right.
but it's definitely good to have some sort of foundation.
It's like familiarity for the people that listen to you.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's like, okay, like just drop 2 trap beats and then something out of left field.
And
it's
then
like
some lullaby, lo-fi beat.
And it's cool and that shows like diversity and that's awesome. But I think you're right. Like for building a brand, I think there's some, because a lot of people do say that like it's good to kind of like hone in a little bit. And that's why I respect people a lot that are able to do that. Because I think that's one of the things. My bad. Were you done? Were you like?
Yeah,
I feel like
No.
I just like steamrolled what you were saying.
No, yeah.
Like that's something that I think is so awesome. Of like people just cranking out trap, R&B, lo-fi, like, and that's what they do. And I think that's kind of why the beat world, like on like BeatStars, kind of started getting to me because I was itching to make so many different things.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like there's always, and like you said too, like you don't have to stick to one style and have that be your thing, but sure, it could be a good idea if you're trying to build a brand. But that's one of those things where like why sync kind of drew me in because I was like, oh, I can make a lot of different things, different market, kind of. Like I'm not making now to find Jimmy down the street that raps or this guy that can provide me with soulful R&B vocals, and or I should say I could provide him with a beat that he could lay down soulful R&B vocals. It's like, where was I going with this?
You're like less limited with
yeah, like you have freedom to be like, okay, today I'm gonna make hype energetic sports track, tomorrow I'm gonna make cinematic, and Thursday I'm gonna make hip hop. And might not get vocalists on it, more so like instrumentals for brands. But then I feel like also people tend to forget too, like sync is also there's room for real music too. Like real artists get on these tracks and then get it signed. So it's like as a producer, like you do have freedom to tap into everything. It's just different markets. And then so like if you're on BeatStars or Track Train or whatever, if you're like a producer and you're making all different kinds of beats, like I'm sure that works for millions. And then like you said, you know, you kind of stay in your lane, also good for building brand, at least like from the beginning. Again, like you don't have to, but maybe a good idea. And then in terms of sync, it's like there are no rules for that. And then there's people that still do specialize, but it's more like, I tend to do this well and I do it. But it's not so much like
I have to.
Because I feel like producers, like you're a brand. Like you have to be a brand. And I think even if you do sync, you should be a brand. Like I think, no, like it's cool. I respect it if you're like, I just want to produce and stay low and nobody know my face. Like I was never like that. Even if I didn't want to be like in the forefront as an artist, like I still wanted to share and release content. But I feel like especially in sync, you really don't have to be known at all. And you know, you could dial down with the genre, but you also have freedom to do everything. And even if you are getting other vocalists like on your tracks, like you can work with hip hop artists, you can work with EDM realm, you could do like cinematic tracks and have fucking opera be on it, you know?
Yeah.
So there's just like, even with that, there are no rules to how you should go about like your career, but there are tendencies that I think sometimes are a good and bad idea, but or better or worse. But I think that's what kind of drew me into sync, because I I always knew I like, it didn't just have to be like beats for me, or like traditional like hip hop beats or R&B, lo-fi. Like I've always just wanted to make whatever I wanted to make and get paid for it.
Yeah.
So for sync, it was like, oh wow, like I could do that, and there's like a market for it. And I don't know, I think like it was never like, for a lot of people it feels like cheesy and like you're like selling out and just making whatever, but like I don't know, for me it's like, I look, if I get a Drake placement, great. If I get a Colgate placement, equally great.
Yeah.
Like
The money's still green.
Yeah, I don't know, it's just, and it's just cool to me. Like I always like, I just remember like watching commercials and like ads and just be like, there's people making that. Like it's not just like, I don't know, there are producers that have like that are there are producers that are demanded everywhere. And I don't know, I just think the sync game is really cool. And like I said too, like you can make a killer R&B track with the dopest vocalist on it, and it can be a true song that like really genuinely makes you feel something, and it gets put in like an ad or something,
Yeah.
And the same thing, like even like the hip hop of today is still like anything could be sync. Like as long as a popular song, or as long as a song gets used for something, that's sync.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of people just think it's this one thing, like you're just writing like cheesy jingles, but like it's real music too. So like whatever route you go, whether you're just on BeatStars, like, and you're just leasing out to like lesser known artists, or you're working with big artists, whether they're paying you a crazy advance just for their artist career, or that song that gets cut to ends up being in a movie trailer, like you could accidentally get into sync.
Yeah,
it's like you
100%.
Like sync is just syncing up songs to media. Like it's not like it, like the beat world and the sync world, like I used to think it was like two different worlds. It's not. Like
they
it tends to be, it's like where you put your energy, but it's like they can totally be in the same world. Like real music is needed. And I don't know, I just think, at least for me, like sync gave me, because when I was on BeatStars, I couldn't stick to one thing. And when I was like, okay, let me start like making stuff for sync, I was like, okay, I have freedom to make a lot of different things. So it was just easier for me that way, but it's a journey in itself too. So it's nuts, but
yeah. And like, not to like disparage the low key artists that I tend to work with, because like I'm early in my career, like lower level type producer, but dealing with like sync companies, I imagine, is a little more like professional and consistent. Cause like, I'll be getting hit up by an artist like, yo, like I don't really have the money for the beat, but like me and you, like we could do big things together and like split up royalties on the back end. And then they have like 100 listeners on Spotify.
Yeah.
And it's like, I definitely still feel like, oh, like someone wants to be on my beat. Like
still valuable.
Yeah, that makes me happy. Like they see some sort of vision with my beat. And like, regardless of if I think it's great or I'm not a big fan, like it's still great to me that they could hear something out of my beat. But like, I feel like something like sync, like they have bigger budgets and they're more established. So I feel like it might be sometimes less of a headache. I'm sure it still is a headache.
Oh, it's
like,
a headache.
Because it's like just waiting to hear back.
It's a headache.
Grab the Advil, dude. Yeah. Anyway, it's gonna be a headache.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, I love working with small time artists and any type of artist, because it's like that personal connection and hearing their goals, hearing what they envision for themselves. It definitely like gives me motivation and kind of just, I don't know. I made some friends just from like, oh, I want to hop on that beat, and like, oh, dude, you like this? I also like that. And like, I feel like the sync, it almost seems like it's more of like just not like a person, like just some big like corporate entity that like, but I don't know, they got corporate money.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know, there's give and take with everything.
If they pay it.
Yeah, I saw one of your videos the other day, like talking about like them not paying like for placements, and it's like in my mind, it's like I think, oh, I get one placement, it's like there we go, like, but it's like then it just people still not paying their dues, and it's got to be frustrating.
It's a trip. Real quick before I go into that, I want to say like the fact that you just said like what you said, like it's still an honor for Jimmy down the street. I don't know why I always just say Jimmy down the street. It's just funny to me. Jimmy down the street is, I don't want it to sound like he's not any more important than if Drake paid you a beat. Like, okay, let's be very, very real. Yeah. Obviously, if you had to pick Jimmy down the street over Drake, you'd probably pick Drake. But like what I'm saying is totally like what you said. It's still like an honor for somebody to want to get on your shit. Like that's really what it comes down to. And there's so much more than just obviously getting paid. It's like, yeah, like we're trying to monetize your art. It's like, yes, you want to get paid for it, but the second you overlook like the simple little things like that like make us like a human being, you know, is I think when you kind of have to start to check yourself, because it's like, yes, it's always special like when something that you make inspires somebody else, and that's how anything starts. Like anybody, like any Drake or anybody started from not being Drake, and like it started from really valuing that like producer relationship, you know, like just back to the basics. Like, oh my god, like I made this, you like this, that take all dollar signs aside, like that means everything. Like that's what 100%. That's literally like what music is at the start. Then when you monetize it, like obviously yes, it is a business, and like both sides should be understood. It's like everybody should try to be able to, like I don't really like the, like in some cases it completely depends on what makes sense for you. Like if you see huge potential and you have a good relationship with an artist, then I think it makes sense to be like, all right, like what could we do? Like you don't have 500 for an exclusive right now, but you want to make sure this beat is yours. Well, that would grant exclusive rights. You know, have that, like what could we do? Yeah. So I think that's an important conversation to have the empathy and the understanding of like, okay, like this is my work. I need to get paid for it, but I like you, I respect you, I want this to work for you. To try to work out a deal is important. I don't love like artists that don't expect to pay anything. Yeah. Just out of sheer delusion. Like this is what you do, this is what we do. Yeah. The same way that you go pay your barber when you get a haircut, it's the same thing, dude. Like everybody's contributing something to the world. This is what we do. So it's like that shouldn't be overlooked. And the whole exposure is like, respectfully, I mean, no disrespect, like you said, like he's got 100 listeners, like you're not in a position really to tell me it's great exposure. It's different if you are respectfully doing large numbers and you have a large following, and maybe this will lead to more music with each other. But like, brother, if you don't have a very strong foundation, then I don't really want to hear it's going to be good for me when it's not going to be good for me. And I don't mean that to be a dick. It's like, that's straight up. So it's like money, it's part of it. Obviously, no brainer, it's part of it. So, but you know, like you said, it's like, it's still always special from the very start. If somebody gives you a compliment, like, oh, your production's sick, this has inspired me. Like, that's always awesome. Whether they have $2 million or $10, like still good. It's still nice. Yeah. But like, give me the $2 million. Thanks for tuning into That Sounds Good Podcast. If you like what you heard, consider giving us a follow, where we talk about production, sync licensing, the business, and the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial path of music. Be good, and we'll see you next time.